Hi, my name is Ian, and I'm the host of the 11pm Somewhere podcast. Over the last couple of weeks, if you followed me on Twitter at 11pm Somewhere, you would have seen me talking about a project and hinting at, and especially if you've listened to the podcast, available on iTunes and Stitcher Radio, about a project called the Irish Craft Beer Arc, or using the hashtag Irish Craft Beer Arc or hashtag ICB Arc. Now, this was an image that I teased during the week. This might look a little familiar to you. So, as promised earlier this week, I said I would outline what exactly this video is and what exactly the Irish Craft Beer Arc is. Just give you a little bit of history first. A couple of weeks ago, I was actually in Scotland at the Brew Dog AGM, Equity for Punks 2014, and as anyone who's listened to the podcast knows, I was actually fortunate enough to be able to interview their head brewer, Stuart Bowman. Now, what you didn't hear on this podcast was that before the interview and for a good deal of time afterwards, myself and Stuart had a very, very long and in-depth conversation about craft beers. And one of the topics that came up was Irish craft beers. And this came up in the discussion about 8 Degrees and the fact that Amberella had won a bronze at the World Beer Cup earlier this year. A beer that Stuart said he had yet to try but hadn't been able to put his hands on any. So as the conversation progressed, myself and Stuart started talking more about Irish craft beers, and I was explaining about our evolution, explaining about our bar culture, starting to see more craft beers creeping in, seeing the different types of breweries pop up, the amount of breweries, and the styles of beer we are, and how we're pretty much akin to the American craft beer revolution in terms of where we're going. We're following that model more than the British model, which was of great interest to him because Stuart and Brew Dog love American style beers. After all, they are sort of inspired by stone brewing. So, this conversation progressed and eventually came to a point where I was like, hey, why don't I just send you a ton of Irish craft beers so you can try them out? Because you don't get to Dublin very often. The last time we'd been was a couple of years back when it wasn't really a craft beer revolution. It was kind of just poking its head up like a little marmot. And he was like, okay, well, I'll send you some of my beers from my stash, like some of the rare Brewdog beers and some of the other ones we were talking about. And I was like, okay, that's pretty cool. The conversation then took a bit of a different direction, and that followed off the back of a very brief conversation I was able to have at the AGM with James Watt from Brewdog, who everyone knows is the MD, CEO, or the captain, and address him as the captain, that's fair. So, myself and James got into a conversation. I was explaining to him what the podcast was and what I was doing, and he thought that was pretty cool, and it is pretty cool, and a lot of you who listen to it seem to think it's pretty cool too. So the conversation changed to, well, hey, I've just been talking to your head brewer about sending over a ton of Irish craft beers for him to go and try out. What if I were to also send a whole lot to you guys and you have a think about stocking Irish craft beers either in the online store or in your bars in bottles or kegs or in bottle dogs in King's Cross or the one in Dog Tap, and this came about from the discussion on Sunday when I went to Ellen for the brewery tour, and it progressed. And then when I came back to Ireland, I was thinking about it more, and I was like, hey, this is actually like a really good idea. Why don't I just send James a ton of Irish craft beers? So I dropped him an email, and I was like, hey, what do you think if I were to send you, following our discussion, what do you think if I were to send you a whole load of Irish craft beers, and you could look at stocking them in the online store, or in the bottle dogs, or in the bars? And he was like, okay. So he sent an email to Conrad in Brewdog, who actually looks after their beer sourcing for other people, and he was like, hey, let's get a load of great Irish craft beer. So earlier today, just after 11 in fact, 2 boxes reached Ellen in Fraser, which is in Aberdeenshire, which is their new brewery HQ, and it contained 28 bottles of Irish craft beer. Now, these bottles of craft beer range from breweries like Brew, 8 Degrees, Clockmore, Black Donkey, Blacks, Trouble Brewing, Dungarvan, Porterhouse, Mountain Man, O'Hara's, Rascals, Galway Bay. And so there's an awful lot of beers from what you can see there. Now, there's a lot of breweries that I didn't include, but again, let me get into the reasons why these breweries were chosen. A lot of these breweries were chosen because they are breweries that I think are, in their production of their current beers commercially, they are at the vanguard and at the cutting edge of the beers that are being produced in this country. And that is not meant in any way to be disrespectful to other brewers who I didn't include here. This is just my personal opinion based on my personal tastes right now. And these guys producing beers that I really, really like. And I think the examples that I chose sort of were very, very... a lot of them are unique. For example, Phil Cullen and his Mountain Man Green Bullet, very, very unique beer in terms of being single hop IPA and it choosing that particular hop. Again, not very typical. Rascals for their Ginger Porter, again, a first beer from a very, very new brewery, and again, very unique and kind of breaks that sort of link that people who are outside Ireland have with Ireland of being the home of the black stuff, or as I like to call it, St. James's Muck. People like Galway Bay, again, very cutting edge, very, very leading. Porterhouse. Now, Porterhouse, people are like, dude, they're established. What the fuck do they need help with? I'll tell you why. Because Porterhouse this year put out Devil's Half Acre, which is a 13.5% double IPA or Imperial IPA. That's fucking bananas for this country. Brew Dog don't even do a double IPA as a special run this year, which was fucking 13.5%. I think the highest one they put out this year was like, I'm pretty sure it was... Hi, my name is Vladimir. I think that was the biggest sort of specialty double IPA they managed to put out this year. So again, it's really, really different. And then they put in Lauder, which is their barley wine. And then it came to O'Hara's, and people are like, well, dude, O'Hara's don't need fucking help. Well, I know they don't need help. O'Hara's are in the US, they're in the UK, they're around the world. Brewdog have never tried these beers. So I was like, okay, I'll include their Landfilan, which is an amazing fucking... I think it's a... taking back of the identity of what an extra Irish stout is. And I thought it was an amazing beer to send. And I sent a bottle of their barley wine as well. Again, 1,700 bottles, something aged in Jameson cask. Very, very cool. From Troubled Brewing, I'd sent their Dark Arts Porter, which I've said is possibly one of the best porters in this country, full stop, in terms of its creaminess, and it's very, very easy accessibility, and very, very easy to drink as well. And their Deception Golden Ale, again, a golden ale. We don't have an awful lot of golden ales. Black's a Kinsale, I sent their beers because everyone knows that I have a huge amount of respect for Sam Black and the types of beers that he does. And again, purpose I'd sent him was, hey, Sam's beers work in great counterpoints to their equivalency in the Brewdog range. In fact, I think they're very, very good counterpoints to them. 8 Degrees had to send Amberella. Amberella had to went over. I sent a whole ton of their Back to Black series. So their Aztec, their Russian Imperial. I sent their Hurricane. I sent their Zeus Black IPA. Even though they've just recently come out with Vic's Secret, which I didn't manage to include. And I'll explain about the sourcing of the beer as well. Brewery has sent their entire range over. Again, because I think Brew are probably one... And again, this is not meant to be just, but I think they're one of the most commercially advanced breweries in the country, apart from, say, O'Hara's or Galway Bay, those type of behemoths. And I just think that it was a good representation of, these are beers that they're simple, and again, not disrespectful, they're simple, but they're very, very well put together. I think their branding is very, very crisp. And I think it just shows, again, the kind of diversity. And again, they're Brew More, they're Saison. It's a clear Saison. Brewdog will understand this. Anyone who's familiar with Brewdog beers is, you don't tend to get cloudy beers. You get very, very clear beers thanks to their centrifuge. I also included Black Donkey's Sheep Stealer, which is a fantastic farmhouse Saison that only got recently released, which is amazing. Clockmore's Heather IPA, again, a great sort of counterpoint version of a heather-infused beer to the Williams Brothers Freyach, which everyone in Scotland would be bloody familiar with, and especially the guys in Brewdog. And then you're sort of getting into things like Dungarvan for their Comera Challenger, which was a beer I had to include because it was an Irish bitter. Again, something that you wouldn't necessarily assume to come out of this country. And I thought it was crisp and clean and would give them something to have a look at in that respect. And from Galway Bay, there was a couple of them, I included Buried at Sea. You have to send Buried at Sea. Buried at Sea is the absolute deconstruction of the Irish stout and putting it back together in a postmodernist, neoclassical style with just that chocolate milk feeling going in there. And I think it's a great sort of reinterpolation of the Irish stout. And then I had to, of course, include Foam and Fury, and I had to also include 200 Fathoms, because 200 Fathoms is fucking amazing. Beginning, middle, and end of. So, now you're probably thinking to yourself, Jesus, Ian, this is an awful lot of beers. Breweries had to cough up an awful lot of beers. Breweries didn't really have to cough up an awful lot of beers. This project is, when I say it's 99% self-funded, that's not mathematically correct, but it shows you the extent to which it's self-funded. The only beers I was actually given by breweries were Number one, I couldn't commercially buy them because they weren't available to buy in bottles to send over. And number two, the breweries, when I contacted them about it, refused to take my money for it. And despite my absolute protestation that I need to pay for the beers because I wanted to do this on my own bat, they wouldn't hear of it, wouldn't take my money. So, for example, Richard Sybury and his sheep stealer. So Richard gave me a bottle, refused to take my money, flat out refused to take my money. 8 Degrees, Amberella wasn't even on its way to the shops in the new bottles from the new run of it. And everyone there refused to take my money. Wouldn't take my money for it. And so I'm, again, really grateful. And then you've got the likes of Rascals. Rascals are not out in bottles, but I love their ginger porter. I think it's such a bold, ballsy statement beer for a brand new brewery to go and put out. I wanted to send it, and I wanted to introduce it to it. Look, hey, this is a brewery by two young people who were just starting out as a brewery, and this was their first beer, a ginger porter. You couldn't get more divide and conquer, which is a very, very typical of the Brew Dog attitude. So I thought it was kind of fit with their ethos of let's just throw something out there and like cast a line in the middle and let everyone fight over it. So I had to ask Carl and Emma for a bottle, and again wouldn't take my money and kindly gave me the bottle. Every other bottle that was in this so that's about 25 out of the 28 bottles was self-funded by me. The shipping of this was probably equally as expensive as acquiring all these beers, and again funded by me. I didn't ask anyone for any money, and I didn't want to ask people for money because I wanted it to be my way of saying thank you to the craft beer brewers in this country for the amazing job that they do, the fact that we have our own native choices around craft beer, they continue to innovate, they continue to seek feedback from Irish craft beer consumers, and yeah, you should all, like, without being a dick about it, put on the green jersey for your beers. And I wanted to share this with people who have an interest in finding out about other great craft beers from around the world, were eager to try these beers and look at commercially selling them as well. So I was in a position to do so, and I wanted to do something more than flap my gums on a podcast, type 140 characters on Twitter, write a whole heap of shit on my blog at 11pmsomewhere.com, or sending pictures on Instagram, or whatever the heck I do on Facebook with this. I wanted to do something meaningful. I wanted to do something which was me saying, I appreciate what the fuck you guys and gals do for us when it comes to craft beer. Hence the Irish Craft Beer Act. I want to say thanks if you've checked out this video and given me some of your time. I want to thank all the brewers who've been involved in this, and a huge special thanks, of course, to the guys in Brew Dog who've been absolutely epic in terms of helping me put this together and been so receptive. I hope this helps some of the other bloggers out there and some of the other podcasters, video makers around craft beer. See what you can do as well. The possibilities, they're endless, and it's in your hands.